The desert was quiet the day she vanished. No one saw it coming. One moment, 32-year-old Clara Hayes was guiding her cattle across the dry Texas plains, and the next, she was gone. Her truck was found near a broken fence, engine still warm. But there was no sign of her, not a single track in the dust. Local ranchers, family, and law enforcement scoured the land for weeks, even bringing in helicopters and dogs, but it was as if the desert swallowed her whole. Rumors spread fast in towns like this. Was it foul play, an accident, or something more strange? Clara wasn't just another rancher. She was one of the few female cattle drivers running land that had been in her family for generations. Tough, respected, and sharp as a branding iron, she wasn't the kind to walk off without a reason. Her disappearance left her younger brother, Mason, devastated and determined to find answers. But years passed. Leads dried up, and slowly the search faded into memory. Then, nearly a decade later, in a remote patch of desert miles from where Clara was last seen, an oil company started drilling. What they hit wasn't oil. It was metal thick, rusted, buried deep beneath the sand. At first, workers thought it was old equipment, but when the foreman climbed down to inspect it, he saw something that stopped him cold. A faded license plate, a broken mirror, and what looked like a boot. Now, 9 years after Clara Hayes disappeared without a trace, a buried secret is about to be unearthed. And the truth, whatever it is, might be more haunting than anyone expected. Because this wasn't just an accident. And someone, somewhere, knows exactly what happened that day in the desert. Asterisk news of the discovery spread fast. Mason was the first family member to arrive at the drill site. His hands shook as he climbed down into the pit, heart pounding like it had the day Clara went missing. The metal they'd struck wasn't just any old wreck, it was the exact make and model of Clara's truck, weathered and half-crushed by years underground, but still unmistakably hers. No one could explain how it ended up buried so far from where she was last seen. The land had been searched, or so they thought. So how did everyone miss it? The oil crew was told to stop drilling. Law enforcement reopened the case, this time treating it not as a disappearance, but as something far more serious. Mason felt the weight of it, all memories rushing back. Clara's last phone call, her worry about strange lights in the pasture. The argument she had with a local land developer just days before she vanished. None of it had made much sense back then. But now? It all seemed connected in a way no one wanted to admit. The sheriff, who had once closed the case with nothing but a shrug, now looked at Mason with quiet regret. "We missed something," he said, staring at the half-buried truck. "Something big." Locals started talking again. Whispers about a land dispute. A nearby ranch sold under pressure. Oil rights, family secrets, and old rivalries that hadn't died out with time. But the biggest question hung in the dry, still air. If Clara's truck was buried out here all these years, what happened to Clara? Investigators began digging deeper both into the ground, and the past new pieces of the puzzle started to surface. And each one pulled the story further into something darker than anyone imagined. Asterisk, as word of the buried truck spread. People who hadn't spoken in years began making quiet calls. Clara's disappearance had always been strange, but now, with real evidence turning up, those old doubts and suspicions started creeping back. Mason dug into the past like a man on fire. He went through Clara's journals, her old maps, receipts, anything she left behind. One entry stood out, dated just days before she vanished. Clara had written, "They're pushing too hard. I won't sell. Not for oil, not ever." That changed everything. Clara had been in a fight to protect the land. A nearby developer, Weston Kane, had made several offers to buy part of the Hayes Ranch. He claimed it was for grazing expansion, but Mason always believed there was more to it. Kane had power in the county, connections, money, and friends in the permits office. He denied any involvement, of course. Said he hadn't spoken to Clara in weeks before she vanished. But Mason wasn't buying it. Meanwhile, the sheriff brought in a forensic team to examine the truck and soil. They confirmed the vehicle had been buried deliberately. There were no signs of an accident, just silence and cover-up. And that raised a bigger question. Who had the equipment, access, and motive to move a whole truck and hide it under layers of sand and time? At the same time, Clara's best friend, Alina, came forward with something she'd never told anyone. The night Clara disappeared, she'd received a voicemail, distorted, almost panicked message. She thought it was a butt dial. Listening closely, you could hear Clara's voice, scared, saying someone was following her. Then, static. As Mason listened to that recording, his jaw clenched. Someone had wanted Clara gone. And now, 9 years later, the truth was clawing its way back to the surface. The voicemail haunted Mason. He played it over and over, each time catching something new: a shaky breath, the sound of gravel crunching, a faint voice in the background. It was like Clara had been trying to leave a clue, even in her final moments. With the forensic team confirming the truck had been buried intentionally, it was clear now this wasn't a disappearance, it was a cover-up. Someone wanted Clara silenced. The sheriff reopened old files, questioning people who hadn't been spoken to in nearly a decade. Most gave the same answers as before, but one former ranch hand, Ray Harlan, had a different story this time. He claimed he saw Clara arguing with 2 men near the edge of her property the day before she vanished. One of them, he said, looked a lot like Kane's foreman, but back then, Ray kept quiet, afraid of losing his job or worse. Now, with the truck found, his conscience was catching up. Mason followed the lead, tracking down the foreman, who had since moved to New Mexico. The man refused to talk, slamming his door in Mason's face. But Mason knew he was hiding something. He wasn't the only one. Land records showed that shortly after Clara vanished, a large chunk of nearby property changed hands quietly, land that had once bordered Clara's ranch. The buyer, a shell company tied to Weston Kane's business network. As this puzzle started coming together, threats began surfacing. Mason found a warning note on his windshield one morning: "Let it go, or you're next." Elena's tires were slashed outside her workplace. Someone didn't want the past uncovered, but Mason couldn't stop. Not now. Every clue, every threat, every unanswered question pointed to something bigger. Clara hadn't just stood in the way of a land deal. She had discovered something she was never supposed to find. And someone was still willing to do anything to keep it buried. Just when Mason thought he was closing in on the truth, everything shifted again. Late one evening, while going through old county archives, he found something that didn't make sense: an environmental survey Clara had filed a week before she disappeared. It wasn't just about protecting the land. It detailed signs of something underground, something metallic, something big. She believed there was an old military structure buried beneath a section of her ranch, long forgotten and never properly documented. She'd planned to report it to the state. Mason stared at the file, stunned. Could Clara have discovered something tied to more than just a land dispute? Suddenly, it wasn't just about oil or property. It was about whatever was hidden below the surface, something someone had gone to great lengths to erase. The location she marked on the survey map was eerily close to where the oil rig had struck metal. It wasn't just her truck buried out there. Mason shared the document with the sheriff, who grew visibly tense. He admitted something he hadn't before years ago. A federal agency had quietly surveyed parts of the desert and asked local authorities not to interfere. Nothing was ever explained. No one asked questions. But now, with Clara's notes pointing to that same ground, the pieces were falling into place. Then came the second shock. A forensic analyst called Mason in the middle of the night. Dade. Run additional tests on the soil around the truck. Mixed in with the sand was an unusual residue chemical traces, not linked to oil or machinery, but something used in sealed storage compounds. Whatever Clara had found wasn't natural, and it wasn't meant to be discovered. The stakes were no longer just about Clara's disappearance. They were about what she had uncovered. And someone out there was still working hard to make sure it stayed buried for good. Mason stood at the edge of the excavation site, the desert wind whipping through the silence as the digging continued. The sheriff had signed off on a deeper search of the area marked in Clara's notes. Heavy equipment peeled back layers of earth until the shape of a large metal door emerged, rusted, bolted, and buried under nearly 10 feet of sand. It wasn't a well or a cave, it was man-made. And sealed, they brought in specialists to open it, and as the door groaned wide, a wave of cold, stale air spilled out. Inside was a narrow corridor leading to what looked like a forgotten underground bunker. There were crates stamped with faded military codes, old surveillance equipment, and, in one corner, something that froze Mason in place, a small locked office on the desk inside, preserved under layers of dust. Sat Clara's leather journal. She'd made it down there. Somehow, the entries were frantic, rushed. She'd followed the markings in the ground, found the entrance by accident, and realized she wasn't supposed to see what was inside. She wrote about hearing voices above ground, the sound of digging, and then silence. The last page read, "They know I'm here. If anyone finds this, don't trust Kane." With Clara's words, everything clicked. Kane hadn't just wanted her land for oil, he knew about the bunker. The old military structure was contaminated, forgotten after. The Cold War and its exposure could have ruined every development deal in the region. Clara's refusal to sell wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous to someone's plan. Kane was arrested later that week. Not just for obstruction and bribery, but for coordinating the burial of evidence. But just as Mason thought justice was finally served, one last twist came. The federal agents, who arrived to secure the site, they never showed credentials. And by morning, the entire bunker was sealed again, fenced off, and marked no trespassing government property. Mason never saw Clara's journal again. Weeks passed, and the desert slowly returned to its usual silence. But for Mason, nothing felt the same. The answers he had spent 9 years chasing had finally surfaced, but not in the way he expected. Clara was never officially declared dead, but the discovery of her journal and the truth it carried gave Mason something he hadn't had in a long time: peace. She hadn't just vanished. She'd stood her ground, fought to protect what mattered, and left behind a trail that refused to stay buried. Weston Kane remained behind bars, though many believed he wasn't the only one involved. Others had played smaller parts, signing documents, turning blind eyes, staying quiet when it mattered most. The land around the site was quietly bought up by unknown buyers, fenced off, and listed as federal territory. Locals were warned to stay clear. The sheriff, now approaching retirement, admitted he'd seen strange things over the years, but never imagined something like this happening in his own county. Alina, still shaken by how close she came to never sharing Clara's voicemail, found comfort in helping Mason create a memorial near the edge of the ranch. A simple wooden marker, carved with Clara's initials, stood facing the horizon she once rode across with her cattle. Though the government never confirmed what was beneath the ground, whispers of a buried Cold War facility and forgotten secrets stirred curiosity in the nearby towns. Some believed the truth was still deeper than anyone dared to dig. In the end, Clara Hayes became more than a missing person case. She became a symbol of standing firm in the face of pressure, of not giving in when the odds are stacked high. And even in silence, her voice had finally been heard. Asterisk,